How can you work if you can't see? The question came 3 times a week, always with that pitying tone that made Michael Torres's jaw clench. They saw the white cane, the service dog, the dark glasses, and assumed helplessness. What they didn't see was the former Army EOD tech who defused over 200 bombs before losing his sight. What they didn't know was that darkness had sharpened every other sense Michael had. So when his regular client, the quiet accountant who always smelled like coffee and stress, came in one day reeking of fertilizer and diesel fuel, Michael's training screamed danger. But how do you convince a small Pennsylvania town that the blind guy giving massages just detected a domestic terrorist? Welcome to Open Book Stories. Before we begin this intense tale of invisible threats, heightened senses, and a veteran who proved that seeing isn't everything, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Clearfield, Pennsylvania. Population 6,000, nestled in the Allegheny Mountains. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone and nothing much happened except high school football and the occasional black bear sighting. Michael Torres had moved here 3 years ago, choosing it specifically for its size and pace. Small enough to navigate on foot, quiet enough that his heightened hearing wasn't constantly overwhelmed. He'd opened a massage therapy practice in a converted storefront on Main Street, built a modest clientele, and created a life that worked within his limitations. He was 40 years old. His hair was still military short out of habit, though no one saw it under the baseball caps he usually wore. His body was lean and fit. He ran every morning with his service dog, a golden retriever named Scout, who'd been with him for 2 years. And his eyes, behind dark glasses he never removed in public, were sightless, damaged beyond repair by an IED explosion in Baghdad 6 years ago. Michael had been Staff Sergeant Torres then, an explosive ordnance disposal technician with the 52nd EOD Group. His job had been to make safe what others had made lethal, defusing IEDs, clearing buildings, protecting convoys. He'd been exceptional at it, with over 200 successful disposals and 0 casualties in his unit, until the one that got him. An IED hidden in a false wall, triggered remotely while Michael was mid-defusal. The blast had killed his partner instantly and left Michael with severe burns, shrapnel wounds, and irreversible damage to both optic nerves. The Army had given him a medical discharge, a Purple Heart, and access to the best rehabilitation the VA could provide. Michael had learned to navigate blindness, to read Braille, to use assistive technology. But most importantly, he'd learned that losing one sense meant the others compensated in ways he'd never expected. His hearing was acute now. He could identify people by their footsteps, read emotion in the subtlest vocal inflections, detect changes in room acoustics that told him where furniture was positioned. His sense of smell had become remarkably sensitive. He could identify individuals by their unique combination of soap, laundry detergent, and natural scent. And his tactile awareness had evolved to the point where his hands could detect tension patterns, muscle anomalies, and even some types of scarring through clothing. These enhanced senses made him an excellent massage therapist. He could identify problem areas by touch alone, could read his clients' stress levels and adjust pressure accordingly. Most clients found it remarkable. Some found it unsettling. All of them eventually stopped noticing his blindness because his competence overrode their assumptions, except for the constant questions. How can you work if you can't see? Do you need help getting around? Is it hard being so Limited? Michael had learned not to correct them, not to explain that blindness wasn't helplessness, that his other senses gave him information sighted people missed. It was easier to let them assume what they wanted while he did his job. His practice had about 30 regular clients now. Most were locals, teachers, retirees, a few construction workers who needed therapeutic massage, and one accountant named David Miller, who'd been coming every 2 weeks for 18 months. David Miller was 45, married with 2 teenage children, worked at a regional accounting firm. He was quiet, polite, always arrived exactly on time for his 2 p.m. Thursday appointments. He had chronic lower back pain from sitting at a desk all day, and Michael had been helping manage it through targeted deep tissue work. Michael knew David by his footsteps, a slightly shuffling gait from the back pain, and his scent profile. Coffee, always. A light cologne, polo blue, and the general smell of office environments. Paper, printer toner, air conditioning. But when David arrived for his appointment on Thursday, November 2nd, something was different. Afternoon. Michael, David said, his voice carrying the usual polite distance. David. Right on time, as always. Go ahead and get comfortable on the table. I'll be right with you. As David moved past him toward the massage room, Michael caught the scent. Strong, chemical, fertilizer, specifically ammonium nitrate. Michael's training identified automatically, and underneath it, diesel fuel. Michael's hands stilled on the towel he'd been folding. Those 2 chemicals together, that was ANFO, ammonium nitrate fuel oil, a common explosive compound. The kind used in the Oklahoma City bombing. The kind insurgents had used in Iraq. The kind you didn't accidentally smell like unless you'd been handling large quantities. Everything okay? David called from the massage room. Fine. Just grabbing some fresh towels, Michael replied, his voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. He completed the massage session on automatic, his hands working through the familiar routine while his mind raced. Maybe David had a legitimate reason for smelling like fertilizer. Maybe he'd been helping a friend with farm work. Maybe he'd stopped at a feed store. But Michael's training wouldn't let go. EOD techs were taught to trust anomalies, to investigate things that didn't fit patterns. David Miller was an accountant in a small Pennsylvania town. There was no legitimate reason for him to reek of ANFO components. After David left, Michael sat at his desk with Scout resting at his feet and tried to reason through it. He could call the police. Say what? I'm blind, but I smelled chemicals on someone? They'd think he was paranoid or confused. PTSD was common in veterans, and they'd probably assume he was having an episode. He could confront David directly, and if he was wrong, he'd destroy a client relationship and probably his reputation in a small town where word traveled fast. Or he could wait, observe, gather more information, use the skills he'd been trained to use: surveillance, analysis, pattern recognition. Just because he couldn't see didn't mean he couldn't investigate. Michael made his decision. Next Thursday, when David came back, he'd pay closer attention. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael became hyper-vigilant about David Miller. He reviewed everything he knew, everything he'd observed over 18 months of bi-weekly appointments. David's scent profile had been consistent until 2 months ago, Michael realized. That's when subtle changes started. The coffee smell had remained, but there'd been new undertones, chemical, metallic, things Michael hadn't consciously registered, but his heightened senses had recorded. And David's conversation had shifted, too. He'd always been pleasant but reserved, talking about his family, his work, local news. But recently, his topics had darkened. Complaints about government overreach, anger about federal regulations affecting small businesses, references to people who don't understand what it means to be free, and sometimes you have to take a stand. At the time, Michael had dismissed it as typical political griping. Small-town Americans felt ignored by Washington. That wasn't unusual. But combined with the ANFO smell, those conversations took on different implications. When David arrived for his next appointment on November 16th, Michael was ready. "How's the back feeling?" Michael asked as he worked. "Better. You're good at what you do." David's voice was relaxed, trusting. "Thanks. Hey, random question. You been doing any yard work lately? Winterizing the lawn?" "What? No, why?" "Oh, I just caught a whiff of fertilizer earlier. Thought maybe you'd been spreading it before the snow comes." "Nope. Hate yard work. Pay a service for that." So David was lying, or at least deflecting. The smell was stronger today. Ammonium nitrate, diesel, and something new. Sulfur, maybe. Michael's hands continued working while his mind catalogued every detail. "Your shoulders are really tight today," Michael observed. "More stress than usual?" "Big project at work. Deadline coming up." "Must be demanding." "You have no idea." Something in David's tone, resentment, determination, made Michael's instincts flare. After the session, Michael did something he'd never done before. He recorded his observations in a detailed log, writing in Braille on his special keyboard. Date, Nov 16 client. David Miller sent strong ammonium nitrate on a TTT C3KC, diesel fuel, possible sulfur compounds, physical. Chemical burns on hands, detected during arm massage, new scarring consistent with handling caustic materials behavior. Defensive about fertilizer question, stressed about deadline assessment. Components consistent with ANFO or similar explosive compound. Client likely in active construction phase. Michael sat back, his training at war with his uncertainty. If he was right, David Miller was building a bomb. But if he was wrong, he was about to ruin an innocent man's life based on smell and speculation. He needed more evidence. And he needed to find it, without vision. Michael had access to tools most blind people didn't. His EOD background meant he understood explosives at a technical level. Components, construction methods, timing devices. His military training meant he knew how to conduct surveillance, how to gather intelligence, how to think like someone planning an operation. And his blindness, paradoxically, made him a better investigator than he'd been with sight. People didn't guard their words around him. They assumed he was limited, distracted, not really paying attention. They'd have conversations near him they'd never have near a sighted person. Michael started with public records. Text-to-speech software let him access property records, business licenses, criminal histories. David Miller came back clean. No record, stable employment, married for 20 years. His home address was in a residential neighborhood, his office downtown. But then Michael found something interesting. David had recently inherited property from his late father. 120 acres of rural land 15 miles outside town, mostly forest, with an old barn and hunting cabin. Isolated, private, perfect for activities you wanted to keep secret. Michael called the county planning office, using his veteran status to build rapport with the clerk. "I'm doing research on accessible rural properties," Michael explained. "The Miller property on County Road 49. Has there been any recent construction activity? Trying to understand if places like that have been retrofitted for accessibility." The clerk was helpful. "Oh, Mr. Miller's land? No permits filed for construction, though." She paused, typing. There were complaints from a neighbor about noise. Generator running at odd hours, vehicles coming and going at night, but no violations. Generators at night, vehicles with no explanation. That fit the profile of someone conducting activities they wanted hidden. Michael thanked her and hung up. He was building a case, but it was all circumstantial. Smell evidence wouldn't hold up. Property activity wasn't proof. He needed something concrete. That's when he remembered. David had mentioned having back pain from loading heavy equipment a few weeks ago. At the time, Michael had assumed work-related, but what if it wasn't? Michael made a decision. He contacted an old military colleague, Captain Sarah Chen, now with Army CID investigating domestic threats. "Chen. Captain, it's Michael Torres. From 52nd EOD. "Torres! Jesus, haven't heard from you since. How are you doing?" "I'm good. Running a massage therapy practice in Pennsylvania. But I need your advice on something. Off the record." He explained everything. The smells, the behavior changes, the property, the timeline. Chen listened without interrupting. "Michael, if you're right, we're talking about a potential domestic terrorism incident. But your evidence is unconventional. No DA would prosecute based on smell, I know. That's why I'm calling you. What would you need to investigate?" "Something tangible. Financial records showing unusual purchases. Surveillance footage. A witness. Or—" She paused. "Physical evidence from the construction site. The property's private, rural. I can't exactly walk onto it without being noticed. No, but I can get authorization for aerial surveillance if there's probable cause. Problem is establishing that cause without compromising you." Michael thought for a moment. What if I could get him to take me there? The plan was simple and completely insane. Michael would tell David he was interested in outdoor recreation therapy, using nature experiences to help clients with PTSD. Would David mind if Michael visited his rural property to assess it for accessibility? It relied on David buying the premise, on Michael's blindness making him seem non-threatening, and on Scout's training keeping Michael safe if things went wrong. When David arrived for his next appointment, Michael pitched it carefully. "I've been thinking about expanding services. Outdoor therapy, hiking, nature immersion. Helps with stress and PTSD. You mentioned you inherited some land from your father. Would you mind if I came out sometime to evaluate if it's suitable? I'd need to check terrain, accessibility, that sort of thing." David was quiet for too long. Michael felt the hesitation, the calculation happening in that silence. "It's pretty remote. Rough terrain? Not sure it'd work for your needs." "That's exactly what I need to assess. I won't get in your way. Just walk the property with Scout. Maybe check out that cabin you mentioned." "I don't know if I completely understand if it's an imposition," Michael said quickly. "Just thought I'd ask. No pressure." Another pause. "Then, actually, that might be fine. Saturday morning? I'll pick you up," Michael agreed, keeping his voice casual despite the adrenaline spike. After David left, he immediately called Chen. He took the bait. "Saturday morning. Michael, this is dangerous. If he suspects, he won't. I'm a blind massage therapist interested in accessible hiking trails. What threat could I possibly pose? The kind that recognizes ANFO by smell. If he's building what you think he's building, he's not going to hesitate to eliminate threats. I'll wear a wire. You'll have aerial surveillance. And scouts trained for protection as well as guidance." Chen was quiet then. "I'll have a team positioned nearby. But Michael, trust your instincts. If anything feels wrong, get out. Saturday morning, David picked Michael up at 9 a.m. The drive took 20 minutes, Scout sitting alert in the back seat. Michael tracked their route by feel. Left turn out of town, straight for several miles, right onto gravel road, then winding uphill. Here we are, David said finally. Not much to look at, but it's peaceful. Michael stepped out, and his other senses exploded with information. The smell was overwhelming. Ammonium nitrate saturating the air, diesel fuel, chemical compounds he recognized from diffusing insurgent bombs. This wasn't trace amounts on clothing. This was an active manufacturing site. Wow, strong fertilizer smell, Michael commented casually. Someone farming nearby? Old farmer used to store equipment in the barn. Smell probably lingers. David's voice was too controlled, too careful. Scout's posture changed. Alert. Protective. The dog had been trained to detect explosives, and he was signaling. Mind if I check out the barn? Michael asked. Want to see if the structure's sound for potential therapy space? Actually, that barn's not safe. Roof's compromised. Should probably keep clear of it. But Scout was pulling toward the barn, his explosive detection training overriding his guide training. Scout, heel, Michael commanded, but the dog persisted. That meant high concentration of explosive materials. Very high. Your dog seems interested, David observed. His voice had changed. Colder. He probably smells animals. Barn cats or something. Or maybe... David stepped closer. Maybe Scout's trained for more than guidance. Maybe you're trained for more than massage. Michael's hand tightened on Scout's harness. I don't know what you mean. I looked you up after you asked about the property. Michael Torres, former EOD, 200-plus bomb disposals. You didn't lose your sight in an accident. You lost it defusing an IED. David's voice was right behind him now. You didn't come here for hiking trails. You came here because you know what I'm building. Michael's training kicked in. Threat assessment, defensive positioning, extraction planning. But he was blind, alone, and surrounded by explosives. David, whatever you're planning, what I'm planning is to send a message. November 30th, Federal Building downtown. They need to understand that overreach has consequences. You'll kill innocent people. Martyrs for a cause. Just like you were willing to be when you served. David's hand grabbed Michael's arm. I can't let you leave. You understand that, right? That's when Scout attacked. The dog's training was precise. Disable the threat. Protect the handler. Scout's 80 pounds hit David from the side, knocking him away from Michael. Shouting. Sounds of struggle. Michael moved on instinct, using sound and spatial awareness to navigate away from the confrontation. His hand found Scout's harness. The dog had disengaged and returned to him. Run, Michael commanded, and they ran. Behind them, David was screaming threats, but Michael's focus was on escape. Footsteps, breathing, the crunch of gravel under his feet. Scout guided him, pulling him away from obstacles. Gunshot. The crack echoed off trees. David was armed. Michael zigged left, using sound to position himself behind what felt like a vehicle. Probably David's truck. Another shot pinged off metal. His phone was in his pocket. He pulled it out, pressed the emergency button that connected directly to Chen. Active situation. Subject armed. Explosive materials confirmed. Need immediate. A third shot grazed Michael's shoulder. He dropped flat, pulling Scout down with him. Then he heard it. The distant thrum of helicopters. Chen's surveillance team, now responding as tactical support. David heard it too. No, no, they can't. And that's when Michael realized what was about to happen. David had built a bomb in that barn. If federal agents were descending, if he was about to be arrested, he'd do what every cornered bomber did. He's going to detonate. Michael screamed into his phone. Pull back! The explosion was massive. Michael felt the heat, the pressure wave. Scout's body covered his, protecting him from debris. The sound was deafening, even at distance. When the ringing in his ears faded, Michael heard voices, running footsteps. Chen's voice. Torres! Michael, here! I'm okay! Hands helped him up. Chen's voice was in his ear. You insane bastard. You could have been killed, but I wasn't, and neither was anyone downtown on November 30th. David Miller probably didn't survive the blast. He detonated when he heard your helicopters. The investigation took weeks. Michael gave depositions, walked authorities through his observations, demonstrated how his heightened senses had detected what eyes couldn't see. The barn had contained enough ANFO to level a city block. David's computer revealed a manifesto, blueprints of the federal building, a timeline. Michael Torres, the blind massage therapist who nobody took seriously, had prevented a domestic terrorism attack that would have killed dozens. The ceremony was small, held at the same VA hospital where Michael had learned to live without sight. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs presented him with a civilian commendation for preventing a terrorist attack. But more meaningful to Michael was what happened afterward. Reporters asked the question he'd heard 1,000 times. How can you work if you can't see? This time, Michael's answer was different. I work because I can't see. My other senses compensate in ways that gave me information no one else had. Blindness isn't helplessness. It's just a different way of perceiving the world. Sometimes a better way. Scout sat beside him, wearing a new vest. Explosive Detection Service dog. The dog had earned his own commendation. Back in Clearfield, Michael's practice resumed. But people treated him differently now. The pitying tones were gone, replaced by respect. They still asked questions, but now they listened to his answers. One client asked, "Do you miss seeing?" Michael considered it. "Every day. But I've gained things too. I hear more. I notice more. I connect with people differently because I can't judge them by appearance." "Do you wish you'd never been injured?" "I wish my partner hadn't died. I wish I hadn't lost my sight. But I can't change that. I can only decide what to do with what I have left." And what Michael had left was enough to save lives, to protect his community, to prove that limitations are often just challenges waiting to be overcome. So now I ask you, have you ever underestimated someone because of their disability? Have you learned that limitations in one area often mean extraordinary abilities in others? Have you met someone who taught you that seeing isn't everything? Share their story in the comments. Tell us about the people who overcame assumptions, who proved their worth despite society's disrespect. If this story moved you, subscribe to Open Book Stories. We publish narratives about unseen heroes, heightened abilities, and those who prove that different doesn't mean less. We'll see you in the next story. And remember, before you assume someone is helpless, consider what you might be missing.